Now, social engineering is a different technique than pretty much everything we've talked about up until now, except for the previous time in the ethical hacking class where we talked about social engineering. But anything that is going to depend on you sort of tricking somebody to give you information that you need that they would not give you otherwise if you just asked for it. This is social engineering. This is something that can happen in sort of in real life if you're having a face-to-face conversation with somebody, but it's not something that has to happen that way. There's ways of this being done over network or over phone. There's ways of this being done sort of in real life as well. So that's something that's worth keeping in mind. Now, one of the things when you first explain social engineering to anybody that hasn't been in the workforce already is sort of this amazement that it works at all. And this is just sort of the way that humans are wired. If you are talking to somebody at your place of work and it's the first time you've met them, most of us don't go through life with the assumption that this is somebody who is a bad actor that is out to try to steal our information and bring down the company as a result. Most people don't go through life that way, and there's probably a good reason for that. If you assume that everyone out there that you meet has your is sort of the sort of person that would have your worst interests at as their highest priority, you're gonna have a hard time going through life, sort of and maintaining any degree of sanity. But there's a lot of things that are sort of the way that we're wired and the things that we think of. That are the right way to go through life that social engineering takes advantage of. You have already been trained, probably, at most jobs that if somebody who's an authority figure comes in and says, "Hey, I need you to do this," most of the time you probably do those things. If you don't do those things and that person is a legitimate authority figure, that probably is not a career enhancing move there. If somebody comes and says, "Hey, I need you to do this thing because of important reasons that are related to time." For example, if you talk to the IT department at your company and they say, "Hey, we need you to reboot your machine right now. We're doing something important," and blah 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 blah. A lot of times you won't think about that decision if they tell you it's something that is done as a result of something that's urgent or is going to prevent you from getting the resources that you need. If somebody talks to you at work and they tell you, well, hey, I know this sounds like a weird thing that you've got to do, but I've talked to, and then they list three or four other people that are also in your department, and they say, well, I did this with them and they're fine. That's going to be something that most people think of as sort of a compelling reason to do things. Now, because most people that are doing that are telling them the truth. Most people that are from your IT department that are trying to do something for you are probably doing this with, if not your interests at heart, at least the interests of the company at heart. And most of us are not used to a situation where we get reprimanded for following direction from managers or authority figures that are above us. That's the sort of thing that social engineering takes advantage of. Um, let's see. The book lists a couple of sort of techniques here, and these are not necessarily uh, sort of worth memorizing, but I think probably most of these concepts are things that you're familiar with already. The first thing that the book mentions is actually not in this list, and it's referred to as elicitation. And if you were getting information from somebody using elicitation, this is something that is where you're trying to engage in conversation, but you're not necessarily asking direct questions. You're just sort of trying to get information about somebody or some sort of situation, but you're not coming right out and saying, "Hey, this is what I want to know." Now, interrogation is going to be a little bit more direct, and that is when you're asking questions directly. That is something that may work better in terms of just being a direct approach, but it's also going to raise more suspicions. If you were impersonating somebody, I think probably most of you uh, are familiar with this idea. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're wearing the Mission Impossible style mask here, although I suppose that would definitely be the most effective way to do it. But if you dress up as an AC repairman, or if you are pretending to be in a role, it doesn't have to be a specific person. Hey, I'm an electrician, and I know you guys are having problems with the wiring in the network room. So can you let me in there and I'll fix it? That would be impersonating somebody, unless you are in fact an electrician. This idea of shoulder surfing is something that you can get information just by watching over somebody's shoulder. If you're in a lab environment where there are a lot of people, you can probably do this without raising a lot of suspicions. And normally, when people think about shoulder surfing, they're thinking about something that's happening just between people that are standing right in the same vicinity. But that same technique is going to work if you have a zoom lens or a pair of binoculars or something that would allow you to do some sort of shoulder surfing from sort of a distance away. Now, okay, so these are in a little bit of a weird order here. This is going back to the motivation techniques that we were talking about earlier. How social engineering can take advantage of people that are sort of generally people of goodwill. It's possible to convince somebody that that something is an urgent a need, and so if somebody doesn't do what you want them to do right now, certain opportunities go away. If you're able to scare people into doing what you want, this is another technique. Well, I just talked to your boss and he told me to tell you to do this, and you're fired if you don't. Would be a way of sort of generating fear. Anytime you're taking the time to build up a relationship or a rapport with the person that you're trying to get information out of, that's sort of what this likeness or similarity thing is talking about. If somebody comes up to you and just says, "Hey, I need you to type your password into this right here so we can fix something," if that's the first interaction you had with them, that's probably not going to work as well as if they explain that they're from IT and this is what they're trying to do and this is the problem that they're having and this is what you can do to help. That's what that's referring to. I think the last thing to talk about here is this. Well, it's not quite the last thing. There is phishing attacks here, and I think we've talked about this a couple times in class already. But any sort of phishing attack is a way of sort of trying to extract information from somebody via email. So there's a couple ways this can be done, but if you work at a company whose IT department is taking precautions against this, a lot of times you will get a little flag on your email that says, "Warning: this came from outside the organization." If you work for Lockheed Martin, for example, and somebody goes out and registers Lockheed Martin, but they misspell the domain name Martitin or something like that, you might not notice that if you're just sort of breezing through an email. So that may be something that could get you into trouble. But if your IT department is flagging something like that, if the email came from outside the organization, it's still going to flag, and that might be something that's worth it. That's worth doing. And I imagine that most of you have probably gotten some sort of phishing attack at some point in your life. If you haven't, it's probably because you don't check your spam folder. A lot of times you can get these weird attacks that come from places that say, "Hey, this is Facebook, or this is Bank of America or something like this. You need to log on and reset your password," and they give you a button to click. And if you click on that button, it's not going to take you to the actual Facebook site. It's going to take you to some website that they have set up that would ask you for your password, and that might even be considered enough to log you into Facebook or your bank at that point. But regardless of whether they do or not, at that point somebody else has what's probably a pretty good password. There's a couple other attacks, and there's not a slide for this, but there are also sort of what I refer to as website-based attacks. Website-based attacks come in two sort of main things. The book talks about here: holes and cloned websites. Now, both of these are things that are going to involve sort of building a duplicate website, and a lot of things, cloned websites in particular, are going to be less effective by themselves and far more effective if you're able to use them in conjunction with, say, a phishing attack. Now, so if you wanted to do a clone website for, I don't know, your bank or something like that, we've used earlier in the semester we used a website crawler that would let you pretty much download somebody else's website and then set that up on your own server. But there's probably no functionality behind it unless you wish to start a bank, which is a little bit beyond the scope of this class. Now, that's anytime you're doing that and sort of copying a website to try to elicit information, that's going to be using a cloned website. If a watering hole is a little bit different, what you might wish to do there is, if, for example, you knew that that everybody in a particular organization was commonly going to one site, you might want to compromise that site and then say put malware on it, and a whole bunch of people are going to download that malware. But if you're targeting that one particular company, that may be a way to do it. So that's a social. Watering hole attacks are considered to be a social engineering attack, but it's not exclusively social engineering. It's probably going to take social engineering to figure out what sort of website folks are going to. But there's also going to be some other things that are not particularly just social engineering. There's also going to be some technical work behind them as well. So those are sort of the website-based attacks that we can talk about. The last slide here is talking about social engineering tools. These are both things that are built into Kali, and I'm going to go ahead and fire Kali up and see if we can at least log into them, but that's going to be in the next video. So this is about it for now. Not too much that I need you guys to know about this other than kind of the difference between them. Set is going to look a lot like Metasploit. It's sort of this menu-driven thing that lets you helps you automate social engineering attacks, and BEEF is something that allows you to sort of exploit things in web browsers. So we're gonna take a look at that and see if we can come up with something that's a little bit more interesting than just showing you slides about them. So stand by.